What is also emerging is that President Trump is likely to write letters to countries informing them that he will be hiking up the tariffs further on them if no deal is finalized. So that sounds a bit ominous. That, of course, is part of his leverage to secure a deal which is largely, if not totally, tilted in US favor. So President Trump is using as many weapons in his arsenal as possible to get a deal to promote US interests without bothering about the interests of the partner countries.
Where does India stand here, Abhijit? India also needs rare earth minerals. Our auto industry is also screaming from rooftops, saying that rare earth magnets are, there'll be a shortage very soon. China has put export controls. There was a report in the Economic Times that China is also talking about putting some export control on important fertilizers and chemicals which are used to grow vegetables and other agriculture produce. So in the midst of all this, India has been in very deep negotiations with the US. Agriculture has been a big sticking point, as we all know. US wants to push in a lot of their agriculture products. For India, agriculture is a no-no. So the question is India anywhere near signing a deal? What is your sense?
To my mind, a landing zone is possible, which gives US some access into the Indian market, but also doesn't disrupt the Indian market to a very large extent. But whether US will be happy with that type of a deal, that is unsure. So it all depends on how ambitious, how aggressive US will be in pushing its agenda. If it's going to be very aggressive, then I don't think the government will style a deal which jeopardizes the livelihoods of literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Indian farmers in sectors such as soybean or even corn or dairy or poultry. Since Trump has literally trashed the WTO rules, we should not be bothering about WTO rules.
Yeah.
But other countries may use this as a pretext to open up Indian market. So that will create another stream of pressure on the Indian government to extend the concessions which we might give to US on what is called a most favored nation basis to the rest of the WTO membership.
Hello and welcome to this conversation on something that the entire world has been grappling with for the last 90 days. The Trump trade tariffs, which has occupied the attention of nations, governments all around the world. If our viewers may recall that Trump had, on a so-called Liberation Day for the United States, had in early April had announced some of the most draconian import tariffs, duties on the rest of the world. Different countries had different tariffs, and soon after that he paused for 90 days. And he paused essentially because the US bond market gave him a scare. The US bond markets behaved in a way that came as a big warning shot for US economic managers, as also Trump himself. And then there was a pause. The dollar was under attack, and we've seen in the last few months dollar has been somewhat in decline, and a lot of commentators, US commentators, had started saying that the way US was behaving, US might cease to be the US bonds may cease to be, and the US dollar may cease to be a bedrock global asset that other countries buy and keep in their respective reserves. Now, we've been through all that. The deadline has just come to an end, 9 July. In 2 days, the deadline comes to an end, and what do we have? For that, to discuss that, we have got as a guest an international trade expert, Abhijit Das, very well-known trade expert. He's been part of our WTO negotiation team, India's WTO negotiation team in the past. He's also been the head of a WTO study center, which is a quasi-government body. He was the head of until some years ago, 2-3 years ago. So we would welcome Abhijit to our discussion and to understand what lies ahead. What is Trump going to do? So welcome to our show, Abhijit. Thanks for joining us. And I would start with an opening question, Abhijit. What do you think is going to happen? Trump threatened tariffs against some 75 odd countries, I mean, major trade partners. And then he paused for 90 days. We know why he paused. And now the deadline is coming to an end. The situation that we have today is that only 3 countries, I think, have done an agreement with him in these 90 days. China, Vietnam, and partially UK. No other country has been able to sign a deal with him. It's very obvious that the terms being imposed were very onerous, difficult to, even for India, difficult to accept. And Trump has unilaterally also extended the deadline to 1st August from 9th of July, which is day after. So what do you see in all this? I mean, let's have a broader framing kind of understanding of this. Yeah.
Thank you, Venu, for having me on your program. President Trump is unpredictable. All of us know that. And he's proved it once again. The deadline has been extended, whether that is on account of US failing to meet its negotiating objectives or it's on account of other factors we don't know. But what is also emerging is that President Trump is likely to write letters to countries informing them that he will be hiking up the tariffs further on them if no deal is finalized. So that sounds a bit ominous. That, of course, is part of his leverage to secure a deal which is largely, if not totally, tilted in US favor. So President Trump is using as many weapons in his arsenal as possible to get a deal to promote US interests without bothering about the interests of the partner countries.
So Abhijit, I understand what you're suggesting. You are saying that, you're suggesting that obviously the terms that the US has been wanting to impose are so difficult that most of the countries have not been able to sign a deal with him. China has signed a deal, and we know the background in which China signed a deal. China, we all know, is the biggest trading partner for the US, and the two are virtually joined at the hips on many trade issues, and their future tech development, their manufacturing, etc. They are so closely linked that Trump had to sign a deal with China. I mean, Trump, in fact, if anything, Trump extended himself and called Xi Jinping some weeks ago, made an effort with Xi Jinping, also because US needed some very, very critical rare earth magnets, critical for their industry, defense industry, tech industry, and whatever energy sector. China had put an export control on supply of rare earth to the US. So So Trump managed to stitch up some agreement where the Chinese opened up supply of rare earth to US, and in return, I'm told Trump also somewhat eased supply of chips to the Chinese, and there was they agreed on a certain tariff, whatever that they will put on each other. Now Vietnam also signed an agreement. So where does India stand here, Abhijit? India also needs rare earth minerals. Our auto industry is also screaming from rooftops, saying that rare earth magnets are, there'll be a shortage very soon. China has put export controls. There was a report in the Economic Times that China is also talking about putting some export control on important fertilizer and chemicals, which are used to grow vegetables and other agriculture produce. So in the midst of all this, India has been in very deep negotiations with the US. Agriculture has been a big sticking point, as we all know. US wants to push in a lot of their agriculture products. For India, agriculture is a no-no. So the question is India anywhere near signing a deal? What is your sense? Or India will also use the August 1 deadline, the extension of the deadline going forward?
Venu, my hunch is that if India and US behave in a pragmatic manner, in terms of showing flexibility to each other's interests, while protecting their own domestic aspects, then a deal may not be out of reach. Even on contentious issues in agriculture. For example, on some of the key products where deadlocks are likely to be prevailing include products such as rice, wheat, and cotton, corn, ethanol, poultry, dairy, etc. But in respect of many of these, to my mind, a landing zone is possible, which gives US some access into the Indian market, but also doesn't disrupt the Indian market to a very large extent. But whether US will be happy with that type of a deal, that is unsure. So it all depends on how ambitious, how aggressive US will be in pushing its agenda. If it's going to be very aggressive, then I don't think the government will style a deal which jeopardizes the livelihoods of literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Indian farmers in sectors such as soybean or even corn or dairy or poultry. So we'll really have to see how aggressive US is in pushing its demands in agriculture.
So Abhijit, what do you think? What kind of compromise can be struck by India with the US on some very, very tricky issues like allowing genetically modified crops, whether it is soya or whether it is corn or other crops, to let them have access. US have access in those as well as in dairy products, etc. What kind of compromise do you think would be possible? Because the political economy of India suggests that there's very little room for a compromise there, especially on GM crops and on dairy products. What is your sense?
You've raised a very, very vital question, Venu. Let's start with GM crops. You're absolutely correct that India cannot give outright access to GM products, be it US, be it Australia, be it any country. So that is a reality which US has to live with. But if you look at rather closely on what might be US's main interest in GM, it might be to seek a more predictable regulatory regime with assurances that decisions on allowing GM products entry into India would be taken in a predefined time frame, which is missing at this juncture. So if there is some assurance given by India that, well, while we will not allow outrightly imports of GM products, we'll do it on a case by case basis. And each case we will decide within a predefined time period. I think that could be a useful landing zone.
Okay.
When it comes to dairy, let's be very clear, US is in no position to export liquid milk.
Mhm.
Their real interest will be in high value added products such as cheese, and there could be a possibility whereby, let us say, cheese which US might want to export to India for pizzas, we give them what is called a tariff rate quota, whereby up to a particular predefined quantity we'll allow imports at a lower tariffs.
So
Now that
restricted
might,
access. Yeah, so
yes,
you're saying restricted access. Yeah.
yes, very true. Access restricted in terms of we will allow only so much quantity to come in at a
Yeah.
lower tariff,
Yeah.
and that quantity can be negotiated. It should not be a very high share of Indian consumption, number one, and number two. Let's bear in mind that US agriculture is highly subsidized.
Yeah.
So even if we give access to US through a tariff rate quota, there has to be a floor price of imports, that the US will not export those products under a tariff rate quota below a particular price. If these two variables are taken into consideration and negotiations are done, then maybe there could be a landing zone in dairy as well. Of course, making sure that the access which we give to US does not extend to raw milk or even products like butter. It really should be confined to high-end cheese. And
Okay.
the similar model could also be applied for a few other agriculture products, this idea of a tariff rate quota. But we'll have to see whether this will be of sufficient interest to US. And
Okay.
that's a big question.
So basically, you're saying that a very kind of restricted access to the US at the premium level of the market in dairy could possibly protect our Amul and Mother Dairy and other such enterprises, which have been very successful in India, not only in selling their products on a wide scale, but also in giving farmer nearly 70% of the selling price as remuneration to the dairy farmers. So you think that those things can be preserved? Is that what you're suggesting through a
Yes,
compromise?
what I'm suggesting is precisely that the livelihoods and incomes of farmers can be preserved, can be protected, if the focus in giving access to US is confined to real premium high-end products, and maybe that is what the US is after.
Okay, so you think US will be happy with that, or yeah, if that is the case, Abhijit, by now the agreement should have been signed. Actually, 4th July or 5th July was the date for finalizing the agreement. So why is it that the agreement is still stuck and most likely not not going to happen by 9th July, and most likely will get extended to 1st August? That's what I understand from some people in the government. You know, our government officials were there in the US to negotiate, and they are now a few days ago they got back, and they were told by the US Commerce Secretary that Lutnick basically told them that you just give your offer on the table and leave it to us. Then we'll decide whether how much of it is acceptable to us and how much is not. So we are at that situation. So, and we also hear news that the America is preparing letters, which is almost sounds like a tax notice to some countries around the world. So are we going to get a tax notice from the US, or a tariff notice, or are we going to get some reasonable agreement? That's an open
I
question.
Yes, that of course is an open question. No one knows a definitive answer to it. But as in any negotiation, the home stretch is perhaps the most difficult.
Yeah.
And that's also the stretch where compromises are made. Issues that were seen to be very, very difficult to come to a convergence, many
Yeah.
of those issues magically get resolved.
Okay.
But
Okay.
that happens if there is pragmatism on both sides. If US is not willing to show pragmatism, then I'm afraid we will end up with a letter. But if US is uh, inclined towards showing some bit of practical or common sense, then it would really be in their interest to compromise and strike a deal.
Yeah. Actually, in a way, Abhijit, to me, what it seems is that India has to make the bulk of the compromise simply because US tariffs against India are somewhere in the region of 4%. Uh, and India's tariffs against US is actually probably three times that, or three and a half times that. So all the action has to necessarily come from the Indian side. Am I right in my understanding?
Yes, that's as far as agriculture goes. But India's real gains will happen if US is willing to open the textiles and clothing sector or leather sector for Indian exports. And when I say open up, it really means that they should bring their tariffs not up to 10%, but even below their existing WTO sanctioned, WTO mandated MFN tariffs, tariffs which US was applying prior to President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. If that were to happen, then yes, there is something for India to gain. Otherwise, from the Indian perspective, this entire negotiation, this entire exercise would be distilled into limiting the damage, which
Okay.
really is should not be the objective.
Okay. So Abhijit, tell me. I mean, the one thing that you're suggesting is that pragmatism on both sides could result in a deal. Now, there are others very serious sticking points which I'll come to. Uh, if there is a deal, I'm assuming that there will be a deal. If not now, maybe by 1st August. I don't think there will be a deal in the next 2 days, right? So we can safely assume that this will spill over to the next 2-3 weeks until 1st August, right? Is that what you
Uh,
also anticipate?
my suspicion is that more the negotiations get dragged,
Yeah.
the possibility of a deal reduces. There's
Reduces, you're
nothing,
saying?
yes,
Okay.
reduces. There's nothing like a firm deadline to focus the mind to strike compromises.
Okay. Okay.
So, to that extent, if the US is willing to be pragmatic, then a deal might be possible. But if US is not willing to be pragmatic and it wants to extract more than its pound of flesh, then be it 2 days or be it 1st August, I don't think India will be in a position to meet the
Yeah.
US demands.
So basically, you're saying that if you want to be pragmatic, you can be pragmatic by the 9th of July. I mean, you can't suddenly change the next 3 weeks. If you don't want to be, then another 3 weeks will not matter. Is that what you say? Yeah.
Absolutely, very correct. India's position will not dramatically change in the next 3 weeks. The red lines are very clear, and those red lines are not just red lines in political terms. They are red lines which take into account, which affect the livelihoods of literally tens, if not hundreds of millions of Indian farmers. And I don't think the government would be in a position to compromise on those red lines.
What are the other red lines, Abhijit? I'm told that agriculture is one big red line, and I'm probably on manufacturing. India could afford to be far more accommodative and compromising, if you will. But I'm I'm told that in digital services, India has a big issue, and one of the big red lines for India is data localization. I mean, I've been hearing that India probably cannot afford to compromise on, given that India's own digital vision is to create AI in India based on Indian data. Data leading to intelligence, AI intelligence, and AI intelligence in turn leading to more data organization within India. So my understanding is that India cannot compromise on that, and the US big tech equally cannot, or would be unwilling to locate their data in India. Is that your understanding too?
Yes, Venu, when it comes to the digital sector, there are 3 or 4 very critical issues. One, of course, is the digital services tax, something which we have, in a way, conceded ground to the US.
Yeah.
In a way, we are trying to uh, give concessions which will hurt our ability to tax this new and emerging sector in the future.
Yeah, that we considered even before the negotiation began, right? The Amazon tax, right? What is called the
Amazon tax or Google tax, whatever you label it. I just hope that in the interim agreement, which might get finalized over the next few days or by 1st August, it's not cast in stone. We still retain the flexibility to impose such taxes in future if the need were to arise. At the same time, there is also a hardy perennial issue related to taxation and revenue at the WTO, which is called moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions. There, India has been agreeing to this temporary moratorium.
Yeah.
That again affects our ability to raise revenue through imposing customs duties on electronic transmissions. I just hope that our negotiators have dug in their heels and they have not conceded ground on this. So this is as far as the taxation and revenue issues go. But there's another stream of issues which has a direct bearing on whether Indian government, through policy initiatives, can give a boost to domestic digital champions. That can be done through imposing restrictions on, let us say, localization of servers. We mandate that, okay, if you're doing business with India and digital area, you have to mandatorily create servers in India, put your servers in India. We will not allow data to flow out. But equally important to something which has not been talked about, which is of critical interest to the US, particularly in the background of emergence of AI.
Yeah,
that concerns mandatory sharing of government data. Government is in possession of huge amount of digital data, which the government can, at this juncture, legitimately use to spur creation of domestic digital champions by preferentially giving access to the domestic digital players to anonymize government data. Now, US realizes the pitfalls for its big tech. If Indian government shares the data with Indian domestic players, within no time they will pose competition to some of the big tech in US. So what the US may be wanting, and at the WTO, US was very clear. They said that if you share government data with your domestic entity, then you must be mandated to share it with any foreign entity which demands it. Now, that if this issue is being pursued in the present BTA negotiations, then that can be a clear red line from the Indian perspective.
So you're saying that's the red line for India. India will not allow, or India should not allow government data which it may want to use to build domestic digital AI champions. May not want to share them with the big tech, say US big tech companies, right?
Absolutely, that should be a red line. I have no inside information on this, but I don't rule out that this would be an important issue important ask from the US big tech in these negotiations.
Okay. There's another big issue, Abhijit, which the US is currently negotiating with India as part of this trade deal, and which relates to government procurement. And I'm told that in India's FTA that has been signed with the UK, the comprehensive kind of economic cooperation deal with UK, India has given UK some access to government to participate in our government procurement, and Indian government procures massive amounts given the government expenditure in India, in relation to our GDP, and I'm told that foreign companies from UK can participate in government tenders, which so far had been limited to Indian companies, participation in those tenders. Now, once foreign companies start coming in, whether it's infrastructure or whatever, big procurement, government procurement. So the US might also want to have the same facility. Now, according to you, would that be a red line for India, letting US companies participate in government procurement?
Venu, again, a very, very important question. And this question speaks to the reality of the negotiating table. If you give concession to one country, it's just a matter of time before other countries with whom you're negotiating will ask similar concessions. We actually opened the floodgates on government procurement, not in the negotiations with UK, but much earlier in 2022, when we signed the agreement with UAE, which had a chapter on government procurement, where we agreed to allow UAE entities to participate in Indian government procurement market. Of course, there were certain safeguards built in over there. Those safeguards related to Make in India preference programs. Now, when it comes to UK, we do not have information from the Indian government in public domain about what has been negotiated. But if you look at the website of the UK government, there it seems that we've given concessions to UK which go beyond what we had conceded to UAE. In other words, what we seem to have given to UK is that in respect of tenders above a particular threshold, we don't know what that threshold value is, but for tenders above a particular threshold, if the UK component is 20%, then they can participate in Indian government procurement contracts. Now, the interesting thing is, it has to be at least 20%. Now, the remaining can be Chinese origin. And if the remaining 80% is Chinese origin of a product which UK wants to bid for in the Indian market, you can well imagine the problems which will create for our domestic manufacturers.
So you're saying, so is this why, Abhijit, somebody told me, some official told me that there is one reason why India has not formally made an announcement on this aspect of the India-UK FTA. They have not really, in a sense, even issued a press release saying that this government procurement has been opened up. Probably they fear that if the government announces it now, then the Americans would also get excited and they would ask for the same or even more in the bilateral trade agreement, right?
Venu, let's be clear. Americans would already be knowing what we have negotiated with UK. Let's not have any illusions on that.
No, I'm sure they would know. Like you said, they would also have seen it from the website. But what I'm saying, the Indian government is shy of talking about this. So what could be the reason that the Indian government is shy of talking about this?
Let's look at it this way. Once the agreement is sealed through a signature, then it will be brought in public domain. So it's really a matter of few weeks or maybe at most a month or two.
Okay.
So this will come out in public domain. My concern is just as we conceded some ground to UK compared to what we had done for UAE, we might be compelled to concede more ground to European Union as well as to the US in government procurement market. And the final point over here, an argument which is made often is that, well, even Indian exporters will get access into the markets in US, UK, European Union government procurement. Now, the reality is very different. Those markets are big, no doubt, but they do not procure from outside domestic sources. If you look at the...
They don't. You're saying that the US and Europe, they don't procure from outside?
They procure very minuscule quantity. I don't think it will exceed more than 2 to 3% of their procurement.
But should there be reciprocity? If India allows a certain percentage,
no, there will be reciprocity, but the way they put the technical requirements in those tenders, only the local vendors are able to satisfy those requirements. And foreigners are effectively kept out. I had done a study when I was working with UNCTAD. This study was in 2007, 2008. For each 100 euros which the European Union procured, you won't believe how much they procured from non-European Union sources. Not even half a euro. It was 0.3%. So that is minuscule.
Got it. Now, coming back to the bigger picture, Abhijit. So what are the what are the other red lines? You named 3 or 4 red lines. Agriculture is a red line. You said government data. Government is a repository of data. Whether that government will agree to share with other global US tech companies, big red line, or whether it will be shared exclusively with Indian companies. Government procurement is a red line, but we are slowly giving in. So what are the other big red lines in your view that one should be looking out for?
The other red line which we should be looking out for, but which may not happen this time, relates to intellectual property rights.
Intellectual property.
But what we've been hearing is that those issues have been kept for subsequent negotiations after July. So we may not see any concrete outcomes on intellectual property right issues in the interim trade deal. But that clearly will involve some very hard red lines, because that has implications for affordable access to generic pharmaceuticals within India.
One last issue, Abhijit. If indeed India does an agreement with the US and reduces tariffs on a number of products, manufacturing and other products, is India now, will it be bound to offer the same tariffs to EU? I'm told that EU would demand, UK, others would demand who are part of WTO, even China would demand. Because this is not an FTA. This is just a bilateral trade agreement, a limited kind of bilateral trade agreement. So, and it is not even a zero duty agreement, right? So what is your sense? Will India have to offer this to other countries, especially other partners like EU and all?
Okay. There are 2 aspects to your question. One is the legal aspect, and second is the negotiating aspect. Let's start with the negotiating aspect. If we are giving concessions to US, since we are negotiating with European Union, they would expect similar concessions. Let's be realistic about that. From the legal perspective, since this is not, the India-UK interim deal is not likely to be a free trade agreement, because it will not cover substantially all trade. So India-US. Legitimately speaking, then India would have to extend it to all the other WTO members. And that can have very large-scale implications in terms of opening up of our markets. Of course, one can take the stand that since Trump has literally trashed the WTO rules, we should not be bothering about WTO rules. But other countries may use this as a pretext to open up Indian market. So that will create another stream of pressure on the Indian government to extend the concessions which we might give to US on
And
what
you,
is called a most favored nation basis to the rest of the WTO membership.
I'm sure, and do you expect more pressure on India from China? Like China is watching this Indo-US, how this agreement will pan out. If it's a very favorable agreement, India gives very favorable terms to US, and it is not extended to, say, China under the whatever MFN. Do you think China then will start sort of twisting India's arms in other ways, which it is already doing? As I said, they put export control on very critical, rare earth magnets that India needs. Indian auto industry has already announced that they are running out of rare earth magnets for EV electrical vehicle motors, chemicals and fertilizers. You never know. India still depends on China for the bulk of imports of bulk drugs. So, what is your sense? Will China? How will China behave? I'm very worried about that. Yeah.
I share your worries, Venu, but at the same time, it's not limited to China. I worry equally from the perspective of European Union.
Okay.
And while we are not particularly dependent on imports from European Union, but certainly they will try all tricks in the book to secure or to persuade Indian government to extend those concessions to them as well. So it's not just China, it will be equally European Union. And China has leverage with us because of our dependence on some critical raw materials, which I'm sure if the opportunity arises, China might not shy away from leveraging our dependence.
So what you're saying, Abhijit, is that this whole thing does not end with an Indo-US bilateral trade agreement. It will have a ripple effect, and there could be many other problems that may arise for India's foreign trade arrangements, isn't it? Yeah.
You're very correct, and hence the expectation that the government has a plan B in place in case the deal doesn't happen and Trump slaps, let's say, 40% tariffs, which he's quite capable of doing.
Yeah.
Then how should the government respond? So there must be a plan B in place for that. And at the same time, if we have a deal and other countries make demands on us for extending similar concessions to them, then how does the government respond? Government must have a clear, well thought out, well considered roadmap to address those situations as well. So you're very correct. It does not end, it will not end with an India-US interim deal.
Okay. And do you feel that India is sufficiently engaged with China to be talking about all these things? Is that the sense you get?
If what is in public domain is to go by, then clearly we are not engaging on trade issues with China to a large measure. And what should be our approach? What can be the strategic fallout of our approach? That I think will require the government to think really hard.
So you would, Abhijit, you would regard this as a serious weakness in our global trade diplomacy or economic diplomacy, that we are yet not really engaging with China in the context of the fallout that might occur on account of India-US, bilateral trade agreement. And there is an urgent need to engage with China simultaneously. Is that your? Would that be a correct position? Logically speaking?
Yes, logically speaking, we should be engaging with China, not only from the perspective of seeing how to solve the bilateral trade problems. I'm confining myself just to trade. I'm not going into other issues. But at the same time, our engagement with China on trade has to be at a larger level, which
Should
is
include trade, investments, everything, right?
going beyond that. It should also look at, since the global trade rules are in a turmoil, are better alternatives possible to the system of trade rules we have, number one, and number two, how to make sure that all countries abide by or respect the rules which they have negotiated in the past. US has completely thrown it out of the window.
True.
We
And there
need
is
to have a few champions who will try to make sure that we get back to the path of respecting trade rules, and also not only that, also to make trade rules more responsive to the developmental concerns of countries like India. So that should be our long-term perspective, and that should in a way be one of the fundamental underpinnings of our engagement, not only with China but with European Union, with much of the global south as well.
yeah, not only respect for trade rules, Abhijit, when it comes to dealing with the US, there is also the question of respect for sovereign policy making. You can't. I mean, US Trump is virtually telling countries to surrender their sovereignty on many issues. The only country which is resisting and really pushing them back is China, and perhaps to some extent Japan and EU to some extent. I don't see other middle powers. Well, some of them, yes, but certainly India is not being seen as giving a serious pushback on in the context of preserving one's sovereignty. I don't know. There is talk that privately India is telling the US off, giving pushback, but it's not being seen in public statements at all.
I think the acid test really will be, if we get a deal, what are the terms and conditions of the deal?
Yeah.
That will really tell us to what extent we have stood firm, we've stood our ground, we've protected our domestic interest. But we should also bear in mind that any deal will involve give and take. So bearing that in mind, we will have to evaluate to what extent have we protected our interests, and to what extent have we managed to get additional access into the US market. Our attempt should not be just to get rid of the reciprocal tariffs. Our attempt should be to get something better in terms of getting US to lower its even MFN tariffs for sectors of our interests, such as textiles and clothing and leather. So those parameters will tell us how good the deal would be.
But certainly a postponement of to August 1 will continue the present uncertainty for all economies. I don't think investments will happen until a clear-cut understanding emerges as to what kind of trade deals are being arrived at, right? So
very businesses hate uncertainty.
So
and till there is predictability, till there is certainty, I don't think there will be new supply purchase contracts to be signed. There will be very little of investment decisions which would be made. So I think world over businesses will be holding their horses, will be keenly looking at a time when there will be more predictability, more certainty in the business environment globally.
Yeah. Thank you, Abhijit. So let's see how things play out, not only the next 24 hours, the next 1 month. As we all know, the deadline has been extended to 1st August. From our perspective, we'll have to see whether any sort of agreement materializes in the immediate future. Let's see how it plays out. And once the agreement comes, we'll be back here to discuss the finer points of the agreement. Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Venu, for having me on your program. I look forward to discussing the deal if it happens with you sometime in the near future.